Hi, everyone. Welcome to Artifact number 65. I haven't done one of these in a long time, but we're back at it. We're going to do some politics today. I have some film stuff coming up. And the reason why I haven't done this podcast in a bit is I've been working on a few films actually. I already finished From There to There, Bruce Ario, the Minneapolis poet. It's my first film with Joel Parrish. You could actually stream it right now at patreon.com/automachination, and we're looking to get it on other streaming platforms. We're going to talk about some other films coming up after we do this show. We're going to simultaneously record the 2006 film Children of Men, which I just saw for the first time in the past month and just rewatched it again this morning. Keith had already known about it. I didn't. So it was new to me, and I was very happy to see it. I was surprised by how good it was. So we're going to discuss that after. But for now, since Epstein is in the news, politics in the news, obviously, we seem to be either hours or days away from another war against Iran. I would argue a treasonous war against Iran because it's being done at the behest of Israel. And it's being done through bribery. Maybe there's a little bit of a compromise on Trump, which is related to Epstein. We'll talk about this a little bit. But yeah, there's a lot to discuss, and maybe we could just start this off with our kind of perception of where we are on the Jeffrey Epstein files. What exactly was that about? What was that ring? What was the purpose of it? Was it just another example of banal interactions that the super rich tend to have? Was it a lot darker? Was it exactly as we expected, or what? How would you theorize, kind of like, I guess, this cabal? What went into it, and what exactly was the purpose?
Uh, well, obviously, we're neither of us like Epstein experts in the way
Hmm.
that certain people are, but the the Epstein files, so called, thus far have been mostly just confusing. I think I've certainly seen it postulated that there was an element of flood the zone in this, where it's like just throw everything out there, including the crankiest, most like obviously untrue and eminently disprovable stuff, like the stuff from the FBI tip line where they were taking calls from like pranksters and schizophrenics and whoever and just writing down whatever they said. There's a lot of that stuff mixed in there. And because people were so primed for what they were going to see in these files, you're seeing this weird sort of mass confusion about like how and why people talk and say what they say to each other. There's stuff in the files that is, I mean, to me, just clearly a joke, a bad joke, like an edgelord joke being told by an actual rapist billionaire, but nevertheless, like jokey kind of stuff that people are clipping out and going, look at this, they admit to it, but, and it's like, I don't think that's exactly what, uh, I don't think what you're saying is happening is what's happening in this particular email, but, uh, the main thing to take away is for me just kind of how intellectually and visionarily degraded our current like elite ruling class really is. There you can see it in these emails. Like it sort of seems like the Soviet Union fell in the early 90s, and a lot of these people just thought, oh great, we're gonna ride this train to whatever is the end state of this. We don't have to pretend anymore. There's no need for benevolent management or anything like that. It's the end of history, as the cliche now goes, and so we're just gonna party. We're gonna go to our private islands and hang out. We're gonna have these like debauched hangout sessions with one another. With some kind. The thing that's confusing about a lot of this is that there's so much in the stuff that's been released that is extremely suggestive. And there's stuff that I think you can point to and say it's pretty concrete what like they're talking about something bad here. But it's not, Epstein had enough OPSEC that if somebody asked him about something that might be a problem if this email came out later. He would type back, "Not for email, call me," or something like that.
Mm,
So, but the main thing I just get is this sort of real, like, I don't know, maybe go with me on this. Like Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein, who's every email for like, probably close to like 15, 20 years, something like that, we can now see clearly like not a smart guy, maybe canny in certain respects,
mhm,
but intellectually, like pseudo intellectually curious, I'll put it
mhm,
that way. He clearly wasn't interested in stuff of substance, and the older he got, the more he got into this new, like, tech adjacent eugenicist milieu that's been percolating from the far right into more mainstream spaces over the last 10 to 15 years. But nothing of real substance to the guy, can't even really type. Not funny, his joke. I mean, what was the Steven Pinker thing? He said he would just out of nowhere be like, "What if any of this have to do with getting pussy?"
mhm.
I don't know why I did Sylvester the cat there, but
Or Daffy Duck, and I know why you would do Daffy Duck, right? Because we know about that little joke, but maybe we'll go
yeah,
into it later.
yeah. Well, we'll save it for off air. But and yet this is the guy that seemingly every or almost every influential, like politically or financially or whatever connected person would go to, like, "Oh, hey, I need to go talk to that guy. Can you introduce me? Oh, can you make this happen?" Like he was getting looped in on Pakistan's plan to join Saudi Arabia in their struggle against the Houthis in Yemen. Like
Mhm,
this just came out recently. Like he was getting CC'd on that kind of stuff, So if this is a person that you are trusting with this level of responsibility and influence, then you're not a serious ruling class.
mhm,
You are not taking the job of being at the top of this heap very seriously. And so that's great for somebody like Jeffrey Epstein because he gets to be extremely powerful and influential and, somebody that is important in this network of power. And all he really has to know about is like the scammier aspect of finance. That's another thing that has come out is, I mean, the New York Times did this story about how, like, their best estimate of how he became a rich man. And the interpretation was like, oh, he was like scamming people, he was doing this, to get one over on people, and he was doing that to get one over on people. And they're just sort of assuming that there can't have been like complicity on the part of the people that he's interacting with in all of this,
mhm.
that they can't have looked at him and like, hey, this young, at the time, working class guy from Coney Island, he's gonna like
Well, Seagate.
see. Okay,
Well, no, okay. Seagate is very different. I remember when I was in high school, there was a kid that I knew living in the Coney Island projects, and he was like, "I go to Seagate, I start throwing. It's gated community. He starts throwing bricks at the people there because he doesn't like them, right? Because of the whole class tension where he comes from versus So like when I think of Seagate, I always think of that story, right?
yeah,
So,
well, but I mean, certainly Jeffrey Epstein comes from relatively humble origins.
hmm
That's another through line of the files, as it does sort of seem like this was more of a new money thing than an old money thing. Something people were taking note of is you're not exactly seeing a bunch of Bushes or Kennedys or people like that,
hmm
participating very much in this stuff. It was more so like Donald Trump, Bill Gates, these people that have sort of, come into money in the last 30 years or so. And, that not even the sort of family lineage of noblesse oblige. So I think I've been a little bit scattered here, but that's sort of my main takeaway is that this has given us a sense that they are up to really fucked up shit, not a very concrete sense of what that actually is, an unprecedented look into what elite social networks actually look like, and a sobering and arguably black pilling sense that whatever is happening in those circles, it's not to the benefit of anybody, maybe not even the people that are like doing this, because they're I mean, they may think that they can go to the bunkers in New Zealand or whatever, but like some of this shit is going to come back and bite them as well.
hmm
So I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, yeah, he definitely was this kind of trend, right? Or it's kind of like, all right, if he's in this kind of semi-socialite um, environment, uh, intellectually speaking, whatever's just kind of like new and trendy, he's just gonna hop on that. And like sometimes you see things from what's his name? Maybe we'll get into Michael Tracey, right, who's doing some Epstein minimization recently. Which I mean, by the way, like it's happening, but it's definitely not going to stick. Like you can't, you're just not going to be able to do that for the long term. You might make some money in the short term, but it's not going to stick. But one of his kind of like statements that he made about Epstein is like, whatever you want to say about Epstein, you can't deny that he must have been like super smart and super interesting. And then it's like, no, like if he was, one of these people in Seagate, and let's say he starts in Seagate and he ends up kind of like on the streets of Coney Island, walking around, homeless on the beach. These kinds of rantics about eugenics or some of his pet theories or about what's that got to do with pussy. I feel like I heard some homeless people say that all the time, bro. What's that got to do with pussy? Like that's something that some rando would say. If that was who he was, nobody would want to be around him, right? The reason why people want to be around him is not because he's fascinating. They want to be around him because he's powerful, because he has access, because he
Well,
could
if I could just
do things
interrupt
for
that,
them.
if I could just say one thing that does come across in these files, though, is I mean, even setting aside the obvious, like, oh, he's got a lot of money and we want access to the money and the power, everybody is very complimentary towards him. Everybody's like,
Of
oh, he
course.
was so nice, he was so generous, he,
Hmm.
did exactly what I needed to help me, whatever it was that I'm doing. I mean, he
Hmm.
definitely had the Brooklyn schmoozer thing going on.
Hmm.
He definitely. Uh, he may not have had noblesse oblige, but he had noblesse. I don't know my Latin well enough to complete that, but like he had the glad handing aspect of
Hmm.
like being a powerful person down pat.
Hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think more than anything, rather than characterizing it, he must have been super intelligent or whatever. He was a great networker, right, with lots of access, and kind of goes both ways. Like, yes, he starts, let's say, with the money. We're gonna get into some of the kind of like intelligence assets part of it as well, but he has access to all this stuff. Therefore, he has intellectuals and other people around him that are now compelled to be around him to curry, different kind of favors, and it makes him look more interesting. And they bring on other people. I mean, I don't disbelieve Noam Chomsky when he said that one of his motivations for being around Epstein was he wanted to meet Woody Allen. I'm sure he did want to meet Woody Allen, right? And just using that as one example, somebody that otherwise would not be necessarily so often around this guy. Well, here's one possible reason why he's doing it among many others. So there's that element to it. So I mean, there is some evidence, at least, of collecting compromising material. There is some evidence of uh, blackmail, even through some of the statements of like people like Bill Gates, right? So Bill Gates, at some point, he did say something like he admitted that he was having an affair, and if like Bill Gates refused to make some kind of donation, he said that Epstein threatened to release that piece of information. So even if you don't get into the other kinds of salacious details about whatever kind of sexual escapades that Gates was part of, which of course he was, right? He's clearly writing emails about getting some kind of STDs and needing to get antibiotics for it, and trying to put the antibiotics into his wife's food because she's going to cash it from him, and so on and so forth. So there's like different dimensions to it, right? There is a kind of a soft compromising material in terms of like you get to know Epstein and you start sharing details of your life, versus also the more kind of the darker stuff, for example, that Prince Andrew would get into. I forget exactly where uh, Epstein said this, but at some point he did call Prince Andrew, who is not known as Prince Andrew anymore, but he said something like Prince Andrew is like the king of kink. He said something like that he's more perverted than I am, which it seems a possibility in terms of like some of the images that have been released. You don't even know exactly what Andrew's doing. He is like on the floor and he seems to be like over somebody. His face is not even like his face is not even sexual. It's just weird, right? He just comes off as a very, very weird guy, and it doesn't help that for whatever reason, he has to be one of the worst aging people that I've ever seen in my life. You look at photos of him in the 80s and the 90s, or even like the early 2000s when in that infamous photo with Virginia Giuffre, he looks a certain way, and then just very quickly, the more that he gets into this kind of world, he just completely physically erodes. And now it's like any kind of interview with him, any photo they might see of him, he just looks exactly what he probably is internally. So, but also, so like another element to all this is, it seems like many of the people that he did tend to surround himself with, they are arms traffickers, right? He himself seems to be involved in arms trafficking. Prince Andrew, of course, like I've mentioned this before, it's a fascinating little twist that tells you kind of like how human psychology works and what we tolerate versus not. It is kind of fascinating that of all the things that Prince Andrew did, his downfall was having sex with a teenager when he had legally for so long traffic weapons all over the world to all kinds of people that should not have them, because they will go on to kill thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not cumulatively, maybe not specifically through Prince Andrew, but through this arms trade, right? Cumulatively kill something like millions of people and facilitate, mass rape, right, of thousands of women and so on and so forth, right? To the extent that Israel is, selling arms to Myanmar, and Myanmar is doing its genocide against the Rohingya, and that is a situation where it's an actual, mass rape that you don't know these people's names, and it's just you have thousands, if not tens of thousands, of victims. It's all being facilitated by people like this, and he seems to be surrounded by these types. Yes, yeah. So there's a blackmail element that we have some evidence for. There's the arms trafficking thing, which tends to be what maybe that's not how he started, but he ultimately was in this world of traffickers.
I mean,
There's
I think
all,
you just got to kind of put your hand in everything once you
Mhm.
kind of get that deep into it. I
Yeah.
mean, you're going to get approached by people that want to move guns from one locale
Mhm.
to another, the same as you're going
And also Ehud Barak, though, like the people closest to him. So Barak is also a major arms trafficker. He's doing like all defense systems and, like spy type stuff, intelligence gathering, which, I don't know how much we put credence into this, but there was the FBI memo that suggested that, we believe that Epstein is a intelligence asset, right? Possibly Mossad or whatever. We could say Mossad because they specifically blame Barak as the one that trained him as such. And two of the
kind of an
people,
intelligence freelancer, I think, more so because
yeah,
he
I
seems
think
to
so.
interact with everybody. I mean,
I agree.
it doesn't seem like there was anybody. I mean, we just found out that he got CC'd on a thing saying Pakistan was gonna,
hmm
help the Saudis in their war against Yemen. So
hmm
it's like he kind of just wanted to be aware of everything. And if somebody came to him and said, "Can you
hmm
get me this?" We don't always know what he asked for in return because he would say not for email, call me or whatever. But somebody emailed him saying, "Hey, this guy I know, he ended up in a prison in Syria. Can you help me?" And he says, "Not for email,"
hmm
which implies that kind of like yes, because if he couldn't do it, he would just say, "No, I don't know anything about that. Sorry." So the
hmm
fact that he's saying not for email implies that there's maybe something he could do about it.
hmm
And I mean, every intelligence service probably had some kind of line into a prison in Syria during the Syrian civil war.
hmm
So it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Except, I agree with all that. He is a freelancer, but just with the caveat that,
Partisan for Israel, I will
yeah,
say.
like, yeah, we're saying that the underlying power structure here, we are talking about Zionism and the Zionist adjacent, right? Even Burma, right? That is Zionist adjacent. Barack obviously being one of the biggest names here, and some of the one that he's among the closest to. Granted, of course, that Zionism is a power structure. It's just kind of like built into, if we talk about America, right? If he's in America and he's doing, he's brokering deals as an American, it's gonna be like to the extent that he's tolerated, right? It's if he was doing this like on behalf of Iran, like he would have never survived. There needed to be layers of protection here. And also, like with this, the Zionist connection, obviously Les Wexner, if he's the one that really put him on and gave him this apartment for cheap and protected him for so long, and he's a core Zionist, right? Barak, obviously Prime Minister of Israel, that in his own kind of way, right? We could obviously blame all kinds of people for the current genocide in Gaza, but the fact that Barak went out of his way to not have a two-state settlement, once you take that out of the equation and you don't have a one-state settlement, now you have this kind of like emphatic statelessness, and any kind of emphatic statelessness is going to lead to mass slaughter, dehumanization, genocide, whatever. That's just how things kind of go.
And
So
yet, for all that, because there is definitely like this sort of joking Jewish supremacist vibe throughout a lot
yeah,
of
I was going to get into that
the
too. Yeah.
files. There's a lot of, and it's hard to, like I say, it's clear that Epstein believed in a lot of this like race and genetics stuff,
Mhm.
especially as he got older. And those are more and more the kind of people that were willing to hang out with him after he got certain parts of polite society would not deal with him after,
Mhm.
at least not in public, after he got arrested for child trafficking. And what was that, 2008, I think was his arrest, or 2000, I know 2009, where like,
I think 2008 was the incarceration. Maybe
yeah, yeah.
he was arrested a couple years before.
Yeah. So, I mean, increasingly those are the kinds of people that saw him as with hands, open that would go to him, whereas maybe like Norman Finkelstein, who was, deep in the shit in the like mid 2000s, if this was before Epstein's arrest, he might have been amenable to being connected with somebody like this, but after he found out what it was that he was up to, he was immediately like, this guy's a scumbag and you should all asphyxiate
Hmm.
in a plastic bag,
Hmm.
for even, trying to connect me to this. Well,
Hmm.
so, but I mean, he clearly was into that stuff, but there is like a jokey tone to a lot of it, at least in the emails that we have,
Hmm.
there is sort of like, there's this sort of like, oh, how we Jews are, we're
Hmm.
like a little bit better, but we're not that much better. And we shouldn't. But in general, the kind of Zionism that Epstein was most plugged into is arguably the less overtly genocidal aspect of Israeli politics. He was kind of more of like in that like center to leaning even slightly, conciliatory, because there's that one email where they're talking about like Judaism is in trouble. It's like we either have to take the standards for what it means to be a Jew away from this, very like Orthodox rabbinate
Hmm.
that has so much power, uh, and allow more people to convert to Judaism and make it
Hmm.
kind of more of a, dare I say, Christian cosmopolitan kind of religion that accepts people into it, or you're gonna, because the plurality of the people in Israel and some of the people with the highest birth rates in Israel are more like the Mizrahi Jewish
Hmm.
population that are, more right wing, more like this exclusionary, retaliatory, genocidal kind of
Hmm.
politics, because a lot of them feel a lot of resentment and bitterness towards the Arabs and Muslims in the region because of the way that a lot of them ended up leaving their countries of origin in the last 80 years. So they were basically
Hmm.
saying like, Israel is going to turn into this like radical Arabized hermit states with like if we don't like intervene and allow more, basically they didn't say it like this, but basically if we don't allow more white people to become Jews, then it's going
Yeah.
to become this like and I use this phrase because it's basically what I'm picking up, this like kind of mongrelized like lesser state without the guiding Ashkenazi hand at the
Hmm.
rudder or whatever,
Yeah,
so.
that was a major, set of statements that Barack would often make. And I mean, look, still to the extent that to this day, right, this is 2026, Israel has been a state since 1948. There's not been a head of state that is anything other than Ashkenazi, right?
Mhm.
They're all European derived, and specifically a European derivation where the worst anti-Semitism or like Holocaust stuff, they not only escaped it, like they were not even kind of like close to ever being in that category, right? Obviously, Holocaust survivors are systematically excluded from any kind of power. That's just how it goes. the resentments against the Mizrahi from a kind of like weirdly like racial way, that that has been going on since the 50s. So we're talking about 75 years in, and they're trying to still kind of like be in power in that way, which like I'm not sure if I'd even necessarily characterize it as uh there's a kind of like I guess desire to call like a little bit more uh less genocidal, a little bit like weirdly more liberal, because when it all comes down to it, yes, like Barack was not calling for the genocide of Palestinians, but to the extent that you fake your way, which is what it was, you fake your way through a peace process, you fake your way through dangling this carrot of a two-state settlement. If you're faking your way through it and it fails, the next step is further dehumanization. The next step is these people can't be part of anything at all, even either their own doing or part of a one-state settlement. Of course, we're not going to allow that. You're just kind of setting the stage for this inevitability. And any kind of like arguments about it back and forth, it's like similar to I don't know, when like the in the Federalist Papers, when there's this like argument about like, oh well, the worst crimes are being committed against Native Americans. It comes from small states that are disobeying federal commands, right? If we had a shrunk federal government, we wouldn't allow these abuses to happen. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, obviously, the no matter who's in power, no matter who wins out, the end state is going to be a genocide of Native Americans. There's no way to get around this, right? Unless you're allowing them to be like, unless you're taking them all in and saying, okay, you're now part of America, which was never on, on the table. Genocide is going to be what happens. So, it's like, but like that's the thing. I wonder if on some level it does get people like Noam Chomsky, or even people like Woody Allen. Like I doubt he's a Zionist in the same sense that Jerry Seinfeld is. Like he's not gonna show up to like IDF, like sort of like whatever, take photos with them and be like super proud of like his
Well, he certainly, when he was famous and relevant, I mean, to be as rich and famous and successful of a Jew as he was, and not like go to Israel to do like big
Mhm.
promotions and stuff. I mean, at the very least, he sensed that for his brand, it would be a little uncouth if he were seen doing that kind of stuff. I don't
Yeah.
think he's been very quiet about his feelings towards Israel for most of his public life. I mean,
Yeah.
I looked this up, and the only thing I could find was him saying, "Well, I think people sometimes." When they're talking about Israel, they're saying something more anti-Semitic than they're like,
Yeah.
that like they don't want to say the openly anti-Semitic thing, so
Yeah.
they
It's like a typical.
Israel.
He's typically
Just
like
like
liberal
typical, yeah,
Zionist. Yeah.
liberal Zionist kind of. But I mean, he did say, the only reason I could think that he would vote for Andrew Cuomo over Zoran Mamdani is the fact that he perceived Mamdani as more of a
Hmm.
threat to because otherwise, why would he care?
Hmm.
It's like Cuomo is like the exact kind of guy that he was like always pretty relentlessly satirizing in a lot of his stuff when he was younger, and
Hmm.
yet push comes to shove, and that's the person that he's supporting over a young,
Hmm.
charismatic lefty kind of guy, with a decent sense of humor and a good filmmaking aesthetic sensibility to
Hmm.
him. So what's the
Yeah.
but anyway, the point is, yes, this is a more, perhaps it's too charitable to say one is more or less genocidal than the other, but it was at least more respectable, and it was like slower going to where it's sort of like it's almost designed to be this thing that like in retrospect, like, oh my God, we didn't really like know what it was that we were doing. That's where
Hmm.
you get that like, who's that Peter Beinart guy that
Hmm.
published that book?
Hmm.
It's like I was a Zionist for so long, and I really believed in it, and I can't
Hmm.
imagine how it turned out this bad. It's like, well, maybe you should
Yeah.
have fucking listened, man. Like maybe you should
I
have
mean,
had
like, I don't even know how you like even read like a Wikipedia page on like Foundation of Israel. Like, how do you read anything like that and not come away with like, well, whatever you feel about the existence of Israel right now, the fact is, the way that it was founded, there's clear injustice, not only in the moment, but especially for the fact that there was no resolution. There's no resolution for the refugee issue. There's no resolution for the fact that, well, the majority population was supposed to get 46% of the land, and instead, or rather 44% of the land, and instead they end up with even a tiny fraction of that. There's been no reparations. Because I think, like, yeah, it's inevitable, for example, that Palestinians, they would have always gone to war, right, against the creation of an Israeli state because they're the majority and they're being thrown out. Like that's just what happens. It's so there's always a blood price for land, period. But I also think it's equally true that had that been dealt with fairly, let's say like in the 50s, I doubt there'd be like some crazy shit going on. Maybe you'd have like, some sort of splinter group. Maybe you'd have incursions. Maybe you'd have some kind of tensions, but you wouldn't have the kinds of stuff that we see now. So the mere fact that it wasn't dealt with, and that's the thing. Like if you're a Beinart and you're reading about this stuff, and he is an educated person, so of course he would know these details. If you're not actually just assessing them fairly because you have like an emotional attachment to Israel, which of course, like I understand, right? I understand why there would be an emotional attachment, but at a certain point, you can't just keep pointing to the emotional attachment to sort of serve as a blanket permission to do whatever the hell you want in the region. So yeah, so and back to Woody. So yeah, he had that statement about I think anti-Zionism could be a blanket sometimes for anti-Semitism, which, to be as charitable as possible, that is sometimes
Sure.
the case. But the fact that that is sometimes the case, that is used as an excuse to never deal with, anti-Zionism as to why, in a more charitable reading to anti-Zionist, why that would emerge. So he has that statement. He had the kind of like liberal Zionist comment. I remember it was in their 70s or 80s. He was like, I just think like what's going on in the area, it's just so sad. It's just so sad. It's just so sad, which is like, yeah, it is sad. Listen, you
Yeah,
can't argue with
correct.
it.
Sure.
It is sad, but let's start assigning a little bit of blame. Even if you want to blame two sides, let's proportionally assign, the blame exactly where it belongs. If you do want to two sides it. The other thing, which is like maybe the most famous statement that he's ever made on about Palestine was I think it was in the 70s. He was doing some show that was being like hosted by William F. Buckley, and a woman from the audience gets up and she says, "Mr. Woody Allen, do you think the Jews should give back the land that I forget if she says stole from the Palestinians? Do you think the Jews should give back the land that they stole from the Palestinians?" And he says something like, "Give it back? No, I think they should sell it back." Right. So he made like, this like anti-Semitic joke that to the point where Buckley, he like makes this kind of face like, oh shit, this is a very edgy joke. And granted, it was a very funny joke. But it's also a means of him not actually making any statements, right? Like it's just a way of like skirting the issue. He's gonna diffuse it by making a joke, and everybody's gonna move on because it's so funny and so good. We're not gonna pressure Woody Allen any further as to his actual beliefs on these issues. So yeah. And by the way, for viewers that are new here or don't know me, I am the world's foremost expert on Woody Allen through the book Woody Allen, Real to Real, that I wrote back in 2014. It's the biggest and most comprehensive book on Woody Allen, which I don't think at this point is going to be topped because nobody writes books for the hell of it in the way that I do. And because of that, there's not going to be any kind of contract for anybody to do a new book on Woody since these revelations came out, at least not anytime soon. So I'm the fucking king for the time being, and let's see what happens in the future. This is why I'm invested in all these questions of Woody Allen.
Yeah.
Anyway.
There's got to be a part of you that's like, I'm proud of the book, but I do kind of wish it wasn't on my CV or something like that. I mean, is there any like in light of all of this, like
Eh, I mean,
it's an associational albatross, if nothing else.
I mean, like, I don't, I mean, I can recognize objectively speaking that had the book been on a different person, like it would have been like better for my so-called career. But at the same time, like I don't really, like if I needed the money off of the arts or off of the book or whatever, that's one thing. But since I don't really view things that way, to me, like I just, I'm literally just proud that I did. I mean, like when I look back, I have I have a lot of fondness for it because of the fact that I did it so fast. Like I did it in less than 6 months, like watching all the movies, reading all the books and articles, doing all the essays, multiple viewings of these films, and just knowing that, hey, like I know that I'm a slow writer, but when push comes to shove, if I'm really, really, really forced to do it, I can work at this capacity that almost nobody can. And the fact that, I mean, like mentally speaking, like I need stimulation from so many different sources. And the fact that I was able to sit for this time and just do only Woody, only Woody, only Woody. Well, even though I have this like ADHD kind of thing to me, I know that I can't do this. So that's really the way that I view it. Beyond that, like, kind of it is what it is.
So what do you think? Because you brought up Michael Tracey earlier, and he's
Hmm.
really staked a lot on, this is all just so overblown. There's really no evidence of anything. What are you all talking about?
Hmm.
Virginia Giuffre, she was mentally unwell. She was
Hmm.
never brought forth to testify because she was such a unreliable witness, and she would be destroyed on cross-examination and blah
Hmm.
blah blah. And it is kind of true that to the extent that you can glimpse something in the materials that we have, there's a layer of irony over a lot of it. There is this sort
Hmm.
of like edgy joke culture that Epstein kind of immersed himself in, as well as obviously anything really illegal, they probably would like get like blatantly admitting to a very severe crime or something like that probably is not making its way into the emails except
Hmm.
accidentally. There was that one email that was like, love the torture video from that
Hmm.
one she guy, which is like, what does that mean? What it could that could have been that could have been like the movie Saw, it could
Yeah.
be it could
Yeah,
be
well, yeah, that so like okay, so this would be an example of a Tracy thing. This is also an example of like, I go back and forth with I mean, some of my Zionist friends at this point have like, cut of contact with me like a while ago. But this one guy in particular, I mean, he was, he was trying to, I don't want to say the word minimize it. I mean, he recognizes like, the perversions and the evils and whatnot, but still, like, there's still this kind of like attempt at minimization because if you're a Zionist, sorry, this doesn't look good for you, right? A Mossad agent that's doing this kind of like quasi pedophilia ring, like, it's not going to look good on, on behalf of Israel, essentially. It doesn't look good. But so like one of the things about the video, I was like, because he was like denying that there was like sexual torture involved in any of these like interactions with Epstein and his associates. And I said, well, it's clear that, Epstein, he does watch torture videos at the very least, and he seems to enjoy them because look at this email. And what it turned out to be, after talking back and forth, was a reference to this like one businessman, not the Sultan, but some businessman in the UAE that ends up like in some kind of like business disagreement. So he essentially kidnaps this guy and it's like a 45-minute torture video that he films, doing everything from like rape to running him over with a truck to like just like crazy shit for like 45 minutes, which eventually he gets on trial for. The charges are torture as well as rape. He's found not guilty, which is insane. I don't know exactly what the specifics were, but it's the UE, it doesn't
and
matter.
somebody thought, oh, Jeffrey will really like this. Let's send it to him.
Yeah, well, he might not have been because there was like some pieces of it that were aired on ABC back when it came out, like back in 2009. But at the same time, I think if he says like I love the torture video, there's definitely a chance that he was given access to the
Wasn't that
full.
somebody else saying that to him? Like that's the other thing is the way that this was released, it's can be
Yeah,
so hard to tell.
yeah. It's
It's like when you're going through your own email and it's like, wait,
mhm,
who's without the benefit of like the little
mhm.
bar on top that says who sent it. It's like
Yeah,
there's stuff nested in other stuff, and it's like,
yeah.
wait, who sent
So.
that? And then like stuff is this is another thing is that this fucking Justice Department is so corrupt that names that are not supposed to be redacted are redacted. Like you're not supposed to redact stuff for the sake of protecting anybody's privacy. You're only supposed to be redacting stuff that's involved in active, ongoing
Mhm,
investigations. And yet the FBI says there's nothing to investigate.
mhm.
We couldn't find any evidence of anything in his bank records and things like that.
And I
So
mean,
he
all
laid
these
this to
women and
rest.
all these women recently at these hearings, like they were asked, like, like raise your hand if you're a victim and have any of you been interviewed by the FBI? They said no. So clearly there's not a whole lot of desire to get to the bottom of this now. Maybe there was some of it to some degree because, Trump was it seems like he might have been the one that initially caused the arrest of Epstein back in whatever it was 2006 or 2007.
No, he
Because
called them after he had been arrested. That could
oh,
that could
okay,
yeah
all right,
they yeah and that God, this shit is so like I think this is a good discussion, but I bet it's also like objectively a mess in some ways because it just like jumps around all over
Mhm.
the place, you know. But it's no that because that came out that he had like called the FBI and said, "Oh, it's good that you stopped him. You know, he's so horrible. We all knew he was
Mhm.
doing this stuff. Blah blah blah." And
Mhm.
originally, people were jumping like, "See, Trump didn't participate. He helped," but then
Mhm.
it came out no, he had called them after
Oh, okay. All right.
Epstein had
All
been
right. So yeah.
arrested.
So anything that's flattering of Trump here is probably untrue, which I mean makes sense. Otherwise, he wouldn't go out of his way to stonewall these releases. But anyway, back to Tracy and this torture video. So my Zionist friends, as well as Tracy, like they decided to hang their hat on the idea that this isn't some torture video of some like little kid or an of age prostitute or whatever. He's just commenting on this other torture, and it's like, well, how does that make it better? Like, unless the argument all along was the only reason why this would be a horrible thing to state is if it's a torture that he himself participated in or one of his associates participated in. But nobody made that argument. Of course, the assumption immediately would be one of like, yeah, like it's him doing some kind of torture or it's an associate doing some kind of torture. Like this is where your mind is going to go naturally. But to hang your hat on this as opposed to like the bigger picture, which is, wow, these guys like, they love violence, they love torture, right? They seem to get off on it. They seem to joke about it. These are not normal things to ever joke about. And if you are the type to do so, it probably means that, you're the type to actually participate in some way. So, and he's kind of like, declaring victory about something like this, which it's not, this is not the big picture. I also don't even understand what the actual like what is the like broader point that Tracy is making about all of this stuff. Like I don't really get what the objections are, and it seems like to the extent there are objections, they're very nitpicky legalese, right? Like he would say something like, "Oh, like this deal from back in like 2007, it wasn't a sweetheart deal. It was very." And also, even to extent like somebody like that's ostensibly like very liberal, like Alice from Queens, right? She was like, it's not a sweetheart deal. It was considered, strict by the standards of the time. It's like, what are you talking about? This guy, he was out of prison for many hours a day. He served a pretty short amount of time, right? There's this controversial statement that I don't know what the latest is in terms of like why this might not have in fact happened, but when Acosta says that he was told that Epstein is intelligence and to leave it alone, there's a lot there that just doesn't make sense. Like
I
if it
think it
was,
came out that it was possibly Alan Dershowitz that was the one that told Alex Acosta that. So this whole thing
Mhm,
like involutes on itself in a weird
mhm,
way too. It's like all
yeah,
these names keep popping. I don't know. It's just a mess, but I mean, if nothing else, to me, if you were to just look at the stuff that's been released and even just look at the way these people are like fucking talking to each other, like if you that there should be something like a meritocracy, and I've kind of moved on from that to an extent, like just because. But I mean, I do understand the appeal of that, and I mean, certainly we should be striving for like if we have to live in the kind of society that we live in, you would like the people with power and authority to have more merit rather than less. But I mean, if nothing else, you would have to take away that a significant chunk of the richest and most powerful and connected people in the world are depraved puerile morons.
mhm,
That I don't know if you follow Adam Tooze at all. I think he's a really smart guy worth following. And
mhm,
he put out this blog post where he's like, in whatever year it was, 2018, 2019, Larry Summers put out an editorial in the Washington Post about America-China relations and the rise of China that I thought and still think is brilliant, is like the best statement of kind of the facts on the ground at the time. And like literally 4 days before this came out, he is emailing Jeffrey Epstein and asking him like what he should do about this young mentee that he's like trying to get in bed with as like a what 70 something guy at this
mhm,
at this point. And it's and in his head he was thinking about it, he's like and this person he was trying to bed was herself like a young Chinese woman. So it's like he's got just like he's got this Chinese woman he's trying to bed, and then he's also thinking about the U.S.-China relationship, and it just
mhm,
like all bleeds together. And so it's like, what is the use of these fucking people?
mhm.
You know, like what why have we allowed them to grab the reins of power so handily when like this is what they preoccupy themselves with in their spare time, you know? And
Hmm.
I mean, they were also aware of this too. You know, there's
Hmm.
that one email which has very racist explicitly also overtones where they're like, you know, the people who would rise up against us are all too busy listening to hip hop and
Hmm.
looking at car and listening to Jay-Z or whatever it was that that email said. So I mean that's the answer and they're aware of it. Like we've done a very good job of uh narcotizing the people that would otherwise be tasked with displacing us from this position. But it's I mean,
Hmm.
I've in general over the last like 10 years or so just felt increasingly demoralized about almost everything that's going on.
Hmm.
But this is like further demor because they're basically like they're almost like making fun of us, you know? It's like they almost look at normal people as like just basically obstacles to their, you know, you'll see like these people, Bill Gates and the people around him involved in all this charity work in Africa, and yet they're openly musing like how can we get rid of poor people? And that was can be read multiple ways. It's like, do they mean how do we end poverty, or do they mean just like the goal is that there's not poor people? You know, like if we do that by ending poverty, then that's fine. But if that's not how it's going to happen, then like what's the other way that we can make that happen? You know, it's there's this real forked tongue aspect to a lot of what they're saying that is just fucking creepy.
Yeah, so there's this there's a supremacist vein throughout all these emails, as you would expect, of anybody in this kind of, situation, if you have access to this kind of power, if you're so kind of destroyed essentially by, leisure activity. There's something, destructive about that, right? There's all those cliches about how the devil loves idleness and so on and so forth. But to just like comment, I guess, a little more on the Jewish supremacist angle. The most powerful people around Epstein, for the most part, right? There are some exceptions. Uh, they are either Jews or just like heavily, Zionists, right? Whether it's like somebody like Prince Andrew that's doing this kind of trafficking to either Israel or Israel's allies. There's a Wexner. There's also the fact that I forget her name. But she was a major figure in Zionism, like one of these like NGOs, I think. And in one email, she seems to be pimping out her daughter and her daughter's friends to Epstein, right? She's like, "Oh, like Epstein, like come over. Uh, my daughter's friends. Her daughter's a teenager at this time. Five of her friends will be over." And it's like, unless you have a very specific interest as to why you would want to be around, as a man in your 40s or your 50s or whatever, around like, a teenager and a bunch of her female friends, like what could possibly be like a good reason for that? And what would be a good reason for the mother to state that five of her friends will be there? Why is that some kind of, carrot dangling in front of Epstein?
Yeah.
And that's one example of a Jewish woman kind of like pimping out her daughter and her daughter's friends who who might be Jewish themselves.
I mean,
There's also
the most charitable reading of something like that is everybody knew that he was like a creep for young girls. And so
Mhm.
even if that's not her offering her daughter, it's like, well, you like being around young girls, right?
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
maybe on the understanding that he wouldn't take advantage of that opportunity, but he might
Mhm.
perv out in his head over it or whatever, you know, and
Yeah.
that be an enticement to him. I mean, that's and the other thing that's come out is like everybody that for the past 7 years since his death in 2019 has been like, you know, I didn't know him, I didn't like him, you know, I had one meeting with him and I found him to be like a creepy jerk, and I decided I was never going to see him again. They were all fucking talking to him in back
Mhm.
channels. You know, they were all hanging out with him. I'm just I don't think that was I remember Steven Pinker's excuse was like, oh, Harvard made me hang out with him
Mhm.
you know, because he was such a big donor, and I found him to be quite allowed. I don't think anybody's
Mhm.
found the emails where Pinker is like, "Oh, Jeffrey, I saw this interesting article. I thought that you
Mhm.
would like to read." But you have to imagine that might be out there somewhere, you
Yeah.
know, in all of this. I mean,
Yeah.
every other person that avowed that, fucking Howard Lutnick, said, "Oh, this was a horrible, I met him once and we decided he was a horrible man and we were never going to see him, and he's in the files over and over again." Just
Mhm. There was also an email where there's kind of like a screenshot of uh, WhatsApp text messages in Hebrew directed at a victim, just kind of like essentially threatening her. Um, so that's also an Israeli connection. I don't know who this woman is, and maybe she's not Jewish. Maybe she's a migrant living in Israel. But for the sake of argument, let's just assume that she's Jewish. So the exception of like this woman that's possibly, the worst case scenario, pimping out her daughter and her friends, and then this message directed at possibly an Israeli woman in Hebrew. With the exception of those two cases, I haven't seen really examples of Jewish women that were being targeted in the sex trafficking operation. And it makes you wonder in terms of like, if you're going to view this from a like either an overtly or a vaguely Jewish supremacist lens, why would that be? Because generally speaking, it is true that ethnic groups, they tend to prey upon their own ethnic groups. And this would also be true, like even, in Brooklyn, for example, like if you go to Hasidic communities, yeah, Hasids would be preying on other Hasids. Like they're not going to be like, I am above, targeting other Jews, right? There's poverty, there's exploitation, there's all kinds of stuff. I've seen this in the Russian community. Obviously, Black Americans living with Black Americans, males would be preying upon one another. That's just how things go everywhere on the planet. The exceptions being, right, like sometimes when you look at these like Arab sex trafficking operations, like some of them like infamous ones where they would fly in Western models or explicitly targeting Western models, Instagram types or whatever, because they're kind of like assumptions about what Western women are like, and also the fact that it is just true that many of these places, Islamic countries and whatnot, they're not going to be as sexually open. You're probably not going to be able to do the kinds of things that you want to do that you'd be able to do with Western women. So they're kind of importing and targeting them directly. So it is an example, one of those less common examples of an ethnic group that is not targeting its own. It's going out of its way to not do so. And I think there is something to this idea that we don't really see many, if any, Jewish victims. And to the extent that you might even identify two potential Jewish victims, it is fairly conjectural. And it's Maxwell, obviously, right? She's Jewish. Epstein is Jewish. They have these like supremacist kind of comments in these emails. They're targeting, and that's the thing. Like this will be, I think, as we have this kind of like rebound in actual anti-Semitism that will be probably coming along further and further once America First. I think like America First type commentary is eventually going to be more and more the norm in America as we pull out of the Middle East and whatnot. People will use examples like
well, there's
Epstein.
a real struggle over that right now.
Yeah.
There's a real fucking fight happening on the right over that, and
Yeah.
I
I
guess
mean,
we'll,
like, yeah, but people will ultimately use examples like Epstein as reasons why, like Jews, they're never part of the body politic. They can never be civic nationalists or loyalists are always going to be elsewhere. They're going to use these kinds of examples. So, I've said that, some of the worst things that happen to Jews, right, in order, right? Number one, the Holocaust, well, let's say in the last couple centuries, the Holocaust, followed by the foundation of Israel, followed by at this point Jeffrey Epstein, right? The three catastrophes that have befallen Jews in the past century. It's that, as far as I can tell, and people use it as evidence for furthering and entrenching this America First stuff.
yeah. Well, speaking of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, it's interesting. The profile that you kind of get is it was like white American teenage girls who were kind of like they were in social spaces that they were adjacent to, but not
Or
within
also Eastern
power.
Europeans, also
Yeah,
Eastern Europeans. Yeah.
oh yeah, Eastern. It was basically people who were like of backgrounds where like they might be seeking like they might be around powerful people, but they're not of power. They're not in those spaces, and they're maybe vulnerable to entreaties that, hey, this could be your ticket in. It's almost funny how that's like a subtle recapitulation of like Jeffrey Epstein's own like entrance like into that world, somebody from a kind of, I mean, even if Seagate is a nicer place than Coney Island or whatever, it does.
I mean, to be fair, back then it probably wasn't as much
Yeah,
as it
I
is
was gonna
now,
say
but
he's
yeah.
definitely a not very elite background relative
Hmm.
to a lot of things, but uh, like Virginia Giuffre, she worked at Mar-a-Lago. Her
Hmm.
family was not rich, but they were around like rich country club types.
Hmm.
And so she saw a lot of that life and would have been vulnerable to the idea of like somebody from it saying, "Oh, hey, you want to make a little extra money? I have some stuff that you could do for me." And then you also have these Eastern European women who are living in the fallout of just the absolute horrors that beset, especially Russia, but much of Eastern Europe in general
And
after the fall of
Ukraine
the
as
Soviet
well was
and
targeted.
Ukraine as well. Yeah, probably watching a fair number of the men in their lives die of violence and alcoholism, in the political fallout of all of that, and then looking and hey, there's like a modeling contract, and they're looking
Hmm.
for like a young blonde or brown-haired woman.
Hmm.
That's me. I'm skinny. There's things are tough. I'm not eating that much. I've got kind of a skinny frame right now. Maybe I'll look into this. That's
Hmm.
seems to kind of be who they went for. And but you don't see a lot of black women, Indian
Hmm.
women,
Hmm.
East Asian women, Latino women. Like there really did seem to be this like I don't exactly know how to put it. Like it was I don't know if this is connected to the eugenicist thing or what, but like there's
Hmm.
like a certain kind of woman that is like the
Hmm.
right kind of woman for me or something like it, which
Yeah.
is
And
so
not just for me,
creepy and
but not
disgusting,
just
but
for me in terms of Epstein, but like the associates, right? This is for whatever reason, these associates, they like these kinds of girls specifically. Um, which
also
again,
not as
right?
many. It seems like it was white dudes, Jewish dudes, and Arab dudes that were like the
Mm,
participants in this as well. That's another, you
yeah.
don't see a ton of East Asian
Mm.
or Indian or African or South
Yeah, I
American.
mean, because you know, it's
Those
and even
types are not as implicated in this. They have, I guess, their own networks,
yeah,
but
I mean, to the extent that we're talking about Arabs, right? We're, this is again like back to the
the
Zionist
Gulf states,
superstructure, right? It's like the UAE, right? It's like, okay, a UAE guy and others, right? It's not, it's not going to be other types. Um, yeah, so and so like back to Michael Tracey and the kind of like minimization. One of the ways that this happens and one of the ways that this happens is so like Tracey would look at these women and he would say like, well, they're being hired as prostitutes, they know what they're signing up for, and they're just coming over and they're getting paid, like like essentially like the subtext is like fuck them, like they're just I watched actually yesterday or I finished watching Eyes Wide Shut, and near the end, right, where it's just kind of like it's sort of like being revealed, like, oh, like this, this what you saw isn't really what you saw. This woman that died, like it happens. She's a hooker. Get over it. There's this kind of dehumanization of these sex workers, and it it's done in a way where it sort of undersells exactly what the sex trafficking operation is. It's called sex trafficking specifically in America. Like I don't know what the definitions are elsewhere. One of the things that would make it trafficking is there is an element of violence or coercion or fraud, and the fraud being, it seems like the majority of these women, they're being kind of like primed for all this by being told like, hey, we're going to teach you how to be a masseuse of some sort, right? We're going like Virginia Giuffre, like she just kept emphasizing like, I was being told over and over again that I would get this kind of like, super important, valuable, a masseuse certificate if I just like start doing this or do that. And, the more it got sexual, it was always kind of like dangled over her head. So these women are being, and like you could tell this also in the specifics of like the testimony, like the statements that were being made against Leon Black, for example, was he comes in for a massage, and suddenly this thing that was supposed to be a massage um, goes in a different direction. He pulls out some sex toys. A woman gets like very scared. She's like, what is this? Takes like throws the sex toys at him and like runs out of the room. So and like if Tracey is like, Giuffre is not a reliable witness, well, all her commentary seems to be absolutely in line with everybody else's comments. This is how you know. And it's not as if these people were, we have like, hundreds of settlements to victims, right? Totaling, something like $500 million at this point. Most of those are under wraps. There's like a de facto gag order. I wonder exactly what, not all of these like made it to court, but I wonder exactly what the statements were. Obviously, a lawyer says something, another lawyer, objects. There's a lot of back and forth.
Apologies, my dog is going a little bit crazy here.
All right, that's all right.
We acquired a dog with mental health problems who cannot uh, put a cap on her desires at the moment that she has them.
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, so there's this kind of like element of there's an element of fraud, obviously. Coercion goes into it, violence goes into it. And so much of the commentary seems to be very similar. And most of the commentary, unless the de facto gag order on these settlements is ever kind of like lifted, we won't know what it is. But I bet you the stories are going to be very similar. I bet you there's going to be a mix of women that are of age, just of legal age, and a mix of women that are clearly underage and they know that they're underage and they just sort of go along with it anyway. So one of the points that is used to like undersell this is just kind of dismiss them as just hookers, which again, yeah, I mean, like, looking at Michael Tracey, I know this is ad hominem, but my assumption as to why he would do something like that is my assumption is he goes and he just sees prostitutes all the time. That's probably the only way that he's able to ever get laid. Like, just fucking look at him. He looks disgusting, right? He's ungroomed.
Well,
He doesn't have any basic hygiene. So my assumption as to why he thinks that this is a slam dunk comment is the dehumanization that he's exacting here. It's the dehumanization that he feels when he either, probably allegedly jerks himself off to violent porn or engages in allegedly violent BDSM style sex with prostitutes.
well, I don't follow Michael Tracey that closely, so I won't. I
Yeah,
won't.
but just okay. You don't have to follow him, but you get
I'm
what
not
I'm
saying he's
saying.
the best looking guy. I'm saying I'm
Not
not
even
gonna.
best looking. That's not what we're talking about. The entire aura is one of total sexlessness when it comes to
What
normal standards of consensual sex. That's just the aura. I'm not
if I
saying I have this as a fact.
if I could just redirect this slightly, I would say that in terms of traditional arguments against sex work, this was like exactly the thing that people say is unethical about sex work,
Yeah,
is
of course.
that
Yeah.
these young women without a lot of money, without a lot of power, without a lot of connections, having that fact taken advantage of by
Mhm.
men in much superior social situations to them, and these
And
women,
that's a coercion element of sexual trafficking. So you have the fraud, you have the coercion, and then violence, which seems to come in
well,
every
even
now
if
and
it's
then.
not like coercive in the sense of, I mean, that's socially coercive, but everything in the system that we have is socially coercive in one sense or another. So
But
that's not,
I feel
that's
like
not
with
a,
sexual trafficking, the standards are a bit, lower. Like that would be considered coercive simply by that
it's,
fact alone.
well, it's also, I mean, like to the extent, like sex work where the sex workers themselves like own whatever it is that they're operating, and
Hmm.
they're like watching out for each other and they have a basic right of refusal of particular clientele for whatever reason. These are the kinds of things that have been hashed out as like the floor of like what would have to be achieved for sex work to be not what most people like think that it necessarily must be, and
Hmm.
basically none of that was met here. This was like the worst caricature of, how sex work could be unethical. Oh, you're a young Ukrainian or Russian woman? Oh,
Hmm.
here, fly over to Barbados and
Hmm.
this guy's there and he owns Victoria's Secret and he'll have a look at you and maybe he
Hmm.
can get you into something. And oh, maybe you're not quite right for us right now. I'm going to keep your number in my files, but we're always looking for attractive women to be a masseuse at this at my house or at this club or at this country club or whatever. And then you just like slowly escalate it to where it seems like that's kind of what they have to do. Like
Hmm.
there's probably not a strong feeling of a right to reject in a lot of
Hmm.
these women that are put into this situation. Even
Yeah,
if
yeah, that's exactly how they describe it. Like I've listened to a bunch of testimonies by various women in the Epstein circle, and that's exactly what it is. Like it's a, I mean, and that's the whole thing. The entire operation is predicated upon this fact. It's organized in a way where it's ever escalating, where you now feel like you can't escape. It's literally what
Also,
it
these
is.
guys were fucking scary. Like they had billions of
Hmm.
dollars to their own name. Like, why wouldn't you think that something could happen to you if you said no?
Hmm.
Even if, like, no, like even if it was like totally, the perfect libertarian of dream of like Jeffrey Epstein shows up at your house with a briefcase and a contract in it that's like, here's exactly what you'll be expected to do for me, and you sign on the dotted line. Like he's an intimidating figure. Like, why wouldn't
Hmm.
you think that if you said no? There might be some negative consequences for you. This
Hmm.
was a highly asymmetrical situation in terms of the power arrangement, even under like the best case scenario interpretation of what was happening, which also to me clearly is not what was happening because they're just talking about, oh, I have there was one email that was like, and it's funny how like, there was all that Pizzagate
Hmm.
stuff. And they did in fact use pizza as like a metaphor to talk about this shit.
Hmm. Yeah, they
Like,
did.
like they said, oh, we have one slice of pizza at the office today,
Hmm.
and we need to know how many ways we need to divide it. It's
Hmm.
like it's either a girl or drugs, So, or I guess I like whatever it is,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
it's fucking. I don't know. The minimization stuff is just so that it's being a like there is this horrible incentive in modern media that if there's a consensus that is starting to form, then somebody can be the one that counter signals that and says, actually, I think that maybe everybody is their moral intuitions are guiding them in the wrong direction, or they have the facts wrong, or it's a hysteria, or it's this, that, or the other thing. And it's, I mean, the reason to do the minimization is not because it wasn't bad, it's because it's bad for the system if everybody thinks that the people at the top I mean, or people think it's bad for the system if most people believe that the people up at the top are all a bunch of like pervert dilettantes, which
Hmm.
is what this cache of release files certainly suggests. Now, here's the thing: I think they might actually just be wrong about that.
Hmm.
I mean, as of right now, in the United States at least, there's really not a lot of movement toward doing anything to any of these people, and there probably won't be even if a Democrat gets into the White House in 2028, unless it's a really like that's what they ran on and they captured the Democratic Party the way that Trump captured it in 2016. Because like fucking Biden sat on this shit for 4 years and he didn't do anything because
Hmm.
the people that they need money from are as implicated in this as anybody else,
Kamala would have won if they sort of like teamed up and said like, look, um, I'm gonna, Biden's not releasing it, but now since I'm the nominee, I will very publicly make this like show of like pressure, release it, release it, release it. All right. And do so because I feel like they're ready, they're ready to overthrow the Clintons, overboard. Like they're not gonna care. I think Kamala Harris would
And
have
they
would
haven't
have
been to
would
this
have won.
point. They were sending fucking Bill Clinton to Michigan in
Hmm.
October 2024 to
Hmm.
scold Arab voters in Flint about,
Hmm.
how they don't know what they're talking about when it comes to
Yeah.
Israel Palestine.
Just do the Epstein stuff. It would have worked. And um yeah. Can you imagine Michael Tracey eating pussy? All right. Well,
Rather
let's
not.
move let's move on from that. That's going to be the way that we end the public show. We're going to move on to the patron show because there's some stuff I want to talk about. I want to talk about kind of like the erosion of status quo with Epstein stuff, whether or not it's going to stick. I want to talk more specifically about Chomsky, maybe some more on Woody Allen and the whole kind of like Sunni angle because she did a decent amount of communication to Epstein, and some of the stuff that she says, I think, is fairly revealing. That I want to talk about some other elements as well. So, for people that do want to be patrons and want to see the rest of this conversation, again, that is patreon.com/automachination, and the patron show starts now.